What happened to my Felix the Cat costume you promised? One man used to feel ashamed for how stupid most people are. Then for a while he felt ashamed for feeling that most people are stupid. Then one fine day, more or less, he had an extraordinary, expanded experience of awareness and saw quite clearly that, yes indeed, without any doubt, and free of all subjective opinion, that most people are stupid compared to what they're capable of, including him, as evidenced by this episode. And after that, he never felt ashamed again, because he dropped dead. Notice, listening to your thoughts run and thinking are two different matters. If you listen only to your own thoughts run, not only will you learn nothing, but you will also never discover how to think. Things go on inside the mind besides what men call thinking. Eye exercise. When you look at things, don't look at things. Look at what in you is doing the looking. There was once a man who kept trying to run up a certain hill, but could never make it. He eventually came up with a new tactic. He pretended the hill didn't exist, and he quit trying. Note, only the extremely short-sighted find fault with such measures and have such silly thoughts as, well, that doesn't count. One man dreamed that he swallowed a radio and that it was lodged in his head. Then he awoke to discover he was a radio who had swallowed a man. So he went back to sleep to try and straighten it all out, in his mind, that is, like where else. Troublesome emotions update. Without illusionary, that is, totally meaningless, specific concepts of self-interest, you wouldn't have emotions, much less troublesome ones. Stupidity update. Without a tongue, no one would know you were stupid. Tongue update. Without thought, you wouldn't be waving around that stupid thing in your mouth. Update, update. Always a damn update. There's this one thing that if you want it, there are two main ways to go about trying to get it. One is to try real hard to get it, and the other is to try and forget about wanting to get it. And strange be to tell, but either way works as well. Ear aerobics. When you listen to things, don't listen to things. Listen at what in you is doing the listening. What kind of fool gets mad at noise? The kind of man who is fooled by noise. Fact for those here who can hear, there is a phantom who passes in and out of men's lives. Most are never aware of him. A few are. You must be. Piggyback facts. If you don't think about you, you won't feel about you. And if you don't feel about you, you can't think about you. And a man mused, I always wondered which came first, the chicken or the unusually stupid chicken. Ha! But now that I'm a human, and a fully grown one at that, I no longer care. So there. End quote. There's this one thing that if you want to see, there are two ways to go about trying to see it. One is to try real hard to see it, and the other is to try and never look for it. And strange to say, but you can do it either way. If it were possible to have a true mystical teaching, it would not be any special system, philosophy, history, or discipline, but would simply be talking about the kinds of things you should already be doing. The creatures on one planet are divided into 34 groups. Actually, only 2, but for the sake of this story, we'll say 34. Anyway, the creatures on this one planet are divided into 2 groups. The sissies, actually, they're just extremely delicate and sensitive. Well, actually, they just think they are, but anyway, they're actually just extremely delicate and sensitive. But for the sake of this story, we'll call them sissies. Well, anyway, they're divided into 2 groups. The sissies, who call what's stirring around in them their spirit, and then the other, more forceful group. Actually, there's no objective way to determine whether they are more forceful than the sissies, but they think they are. And for the sake of the stories, we'll let it go at that. Anyway, the more forceful group calls what's stirring around in them their mind. Okay, now the only reason I bring up this story, well, not actually the only reason that I bring it up, well, actually not bring it up, but made it up, is simply to make this point, that all creatures on all worlds who can tell and hear tales are always divided into two groups. No matter where they are, no matter what they look like, always two groups. Nifty, huh? The difference between those seeking God and those after enlightenment is the difference between those whose radio in their head is not quite on a station and those whose radio in their head is also not quite on a station, but one of the two don't go nuts over it. No. And don't you be so quick as to figure you know which is which. In one land, all children are born with an inheritance. Most forget about it, a few don't. At least not entirely. One fellow kept changing the title of his proposed autobiography. First it was, I am a one-man news team. Then went to, I am a one-man wrecking crew. Then became, I am a one-man natural disaster. And finally he seemed to settle on this one. I once believed I was a one-man something or other, but now I know better. He invites interested publishers to contact him at his present address, room 602, the Northcrest Clinic for Severe Eye Damage. A true artistic endeavor, a true transcendental endeavor. Both can only occur when there is no goal outside the endeavor itself. Stratospheric fact, if you think about you, you'll think lowly of you. The more you understand, the more it becomes a matter of, although you're not to blame, you're now responsible for your own errors and delusions. With the king's sword to his throat, one man said, I will tell you anything you want to know, except what I will or will not do. Thinking there is but one special way to get to where you want to go can keep you from ever getting there, much less anywhere. Every time this one man would hear people say something and think that they had it backwards, he'd make himself momentarily think about it in that fashion. For many years, one man believed that he was hearing other people talk whenever he heard them say something. Then he started believing that he wasn't hearing them when he heard them talk, but rather was hearing himself hear them. And all of the normal passengers on board said that they needed to go back to their cabin and lay down for a while and get their equilibrium back on straight. Sissies. One man said, okay, let me get this straight. First, we don't look and we don't listen. Then we look and listen. And then we don't look or listen again? All things have their opposite. All things have their obvious opposite, save one, the natural. The opposite of natural is not unnatural. And if you can discover what it is, you'll be freed from a whole bunch of junk. And finally, a hint update. Don't look at the content of your thoughts, but rather at the phenomenon of thought itself. And as always, we're talking only about the mind, no matter what it sounds. It may sound like we're discussing. And specifically, what an interested party might do until absolutely clear consciousness becomes a constant part of your life. Head. And for that, I had a new description, a new diagram, since everyone eventually gets to the place that you understand within the privacy of your own head what you're dealing with. It becomes a question of how to deal with it, or looked at another way, even if you have an idea of where you're going and you cannot get there on a continual basis, or you're not there at the present moment, it is a matter of looking for another map, because whatever map got you there last time, in the instance of what this is about, it is scant possibility that will take you there again. So I had a new mapping of mental processes. Consider it like 4 modes, 4 mental modes. Or you can even consider it, since the guy brought it up tonight, you could think about it in another way, as the operations of a one-man news team. That it's just you, out by yourself, and you're doing your own, through the marvels of modern technology, you're doing your own sound, you're doing your own light, you're doing it all. But we're, of course, talking about the mind. But there is a very specific and useful way, I would suggest for some of you, to consider that there are these 4 modes. And this is not simply a concocted out of the blue theory or an excuse to draw a diagram, but you can observe the manifestations. You already are going to be aware of all of them. But the whole point of any map, if it's going to be useful, is that it might trigger something that you'll be able to take one of these and perhaps use it against one of the other modes. But now consider it, to begin with, because it all fits, as strictly an audio-visual, or an allegory to a strictly audio-visual phenomenon. Talking about the mind. It obviously has a record mode. And the record mode is on as long as you're alive. But it has degrees of focus, which is equitable to attention, but it is in the same way that if it is not focused, if you picture this, that here you are, you're the one-man news team, and you've got this thing, instead of this camera with the lights and sound all built in, you've got your mind. When you're born, the thing is running, and as long as you're alive, it runs. Film and the tape is running in the camera all the time. But if it is not specifically focused, and there is no objective standard to this, well, there's one way you can know there's an objective standard. If it is not intense, if it is not focused enough, it does not register in memory. You can never retrieve it. But as you're standing around, you can be doing nothing. You can be asleep. And the camera, the film and the audio, remember we're talking about a sound camera. And so the audio track on the film itself, the video, it is running constantly. But it can be in more or less intense focus. You understand that? In the same way that you can be staying there staring off into space. And you're not focused. Something can happen, and you have to literally bring your attention back into focus. You can be at a traffic light and just stare down at you stop at a traffic light and be staring down at the steering wheel or at the window, and suddenly you hear a horn blow, and you realize, the light changed, and people behind you are aware of it, and you weren't. But at that time, your consciousness, your mental activity had not stopped. The film and the tape was rolling. You were not totally oblivious to the external world. But it was not focused. It was not specifically focused to a degree intense enough that it was actually recording. Which by now you all know that if suddenly I jumped into the seat beside you and said, just then when you were staring before they blew the horn, what were you thinking about? I mean, you looked like you were just lost in reverie. And the truth is, you got no idea. The next mode, playback. Now, under all normal conditions, playback is running all of your life. The report, kind of an iffy word, but I had to tie it into something. The reporting mode Well, first let me point out the record mode, you understand, requires no attention, because the record mode is running constantly. It is running even when you're asleep, when by all ordinary descriptions you are not conscious, but it is still running, and it is running when you're staring off and semi-catatonic even while you're out of bed. It is running, but it requires no attention, none whatsoever. It's going to go on until the day you die. The reporting mode requires attention. It would be then, right quick, this is no great importance, but to give you some notion of why I went ahead and used the one-man news team, would be that there you are just sort of staying in a parking lot and suddenly a public figure walks by. Maybe the one you were waiting on, but anyway, somebody goes by that you recognize. Something happens to catch your attention, and if it was a news team, it would be then that you had to pull yourself together, make sure the lights were on him, make sure the camera was in focus, make sure the tape was turned up to the right volume, and you would have to then give it your attention. In other words, hey, we're on duty. Here comes Senator so-and-so, we got to get to work. It requires attention. You have to willfully and deliberately do it. It is the only place, it is the only mode wherein you can do anything resembling or engage in creative effort intellectually. It is the only place that you can objectively analyze. It is some part of it. It is a relatively small part, I would submit to you, but anyway, a part of it is what ordinary people simply call concentration. That it is the difference that you are sitting around watching TV or doing nothing, and you're putting off doing your taxes. And you can be aware of your environment. You can be watching TV, you can be talking to whoever's in the house with you, and then finally you realize, well, I got to get down to this. And you turn off the TV, and your state of consciousness, ordinarily, your mental state with ordinary people is not that discernible one episode to another, but they are aware of this. Everyone is. Turn off the TV. Would you guys hold it down? I've got to get to work on this. And if you cannot do it by rote, if you're not a experienced preparer, you've got to turn your attention to it. You know, you do all this stuff. You turn down the TV and get the lights, put on your glasses, and you look at it, and you have to concentrate. That would be the reporting mode. The only time, well, I'll get in a minute. The pause mode is relatively unknown to ordinary people. The term and my description will be fairly, if ordinary people were listening to it, they would find it questionable. Everyone has it. It is just simply the moments wherein time, your recording mechanism, the flow of life's energy through you, not literally, but through you in the mental level, it's like it almost stops. It's between breaths. It's when nothing is going on, but with ordinary people, or with everybody under ordinary conditions, I should say, it is a very fleeting affair. And for all intents and purposes, an ordinary person, even if they had followed my allegory thus far, if it got to pause, they would be well within their rights to go, well, I don't understand that. You know, if I hadn't pointed out that the record was always running, they might say, well, you mean when you're asleep? No, it's still running. But pause, I'll get to it. Those of you who hadn't already figured out how it can be used. But with ordinary people, it wouldn't mean much. They might take my word for it for the rest of this discussion for the sake of it. If I say, well, just let it go. But it's like just that you can just almost mash a button and just momentarily it puts everything on hold. You're not actually reporting, and the record and the playback are momentarily halted. It is, as I will point out in a minute, compared to the active dynamics of the reporting mode, this would be inactive. They are similar. They're like cousins. But the pause would be seeking a kind of inactivity as opposed to the reporting being involved with specific and willful activity. Okay. Now some characteristics besides those, more specifically. The playback, I assume the playback, and I am suggesting that some of you can get more out of this than the normal description even I use, and most people do, of the normal runnings of the mind, daydreams. This covers all of that. But the operations going on in your skull, if you think about it as playback, literally, in the same way that there is recorded material and it's being played back, it is a machine, and this is open to observation, as always, but I'm telling you, under all normal conditions, it never stops. The playback is running when you're asleep. It's what you call dreams. It is running continually. There are only 2 ways to shut, well, there are 3 ways. Well, there are 4 ways, if you want to get pushy. Only 4 ways to shut off the playback, and that is to have it in serious, intense report mode, report mode, or in the pause mode. The other 2 would be extreme physical fatigue. And the 4th, of course, being our all-time favorite, death. But that's the only 4 ways that the playback ever shuts off. Consider it. Rather than looking at it as being some wild, uncontrollable, untoward, anomalous, heteroclitic operation of the mind, look at it, in the way I'm describing it, that there are 4 modes in the mind, and they have characteristics that, I'll leave it again, absolutely to your observation to see if I am misdescribing it. The playback never stops except under the conditions I mentioned, and I'll mention them a bit more specifically in a second. But the playback is running. It's running right now in you. But consider the term playback. Now, playback is one thing. In the audiovisual sense, in the technical sense, playback requires that there be previously recorded material. When you start talking to people about daydreams, or even when you try and consider your own, there is no real firm way to look at it. You end up wanting to battle with it. You look at it as being some sort of opposition to what you're attempting to do with consciousness, a so-called attempt to change one's state of mind, that the normal workings of the mind obviously are of no benefit. And it is not unexpected, and it is not condemnable in the beginning to even for a person to look at as being their opposition. Because you know it's not contributing anything after you've been in this a bit. But rather than look at it, it's just like this strange wildfire. It's just one thing, you keep telling it, shut up, be quiet, and you keep trying to, throughout the ages, not just you, but I'm speaking now you and people interested in such as this, archetypically, keep searching for tricks, ways, methods, disciplines to bring the mind under some control, to shut it down, to shut it off, to calm it, to quieten it, to do something like leave me alone and let me see what I can do here. Even after you've got an idea what to do, even after you have been somewhere, then you find yourself back where you started more or less. And the damn thing's still running. It doesn't do any good to say, to turn to the mind, the ordinary mind, and say, you don't know where I've been. You don't know the sights I've seen. You don't know the extraordinary states of consciousness in which I've been, and they make you look like. But boy, as you should know by now, that has a great effect on the mind. All you got to do is insult the mind, humble the mind, tell the mind, listen, lay off of me. That's a bit, of course, for you people new to it, a theatrical sarcasm, because you got to be an idiot to think you can do anything with your mind. You can insult an attorney faster than you can your mind. You can make a priest feel ashamed, or a rabbi hide his head under a hat. Well, he's already done that. Well, anyway. If you would consider what I'm saying to a useful degree, I suggest some of you will so find it, rather than just this sort of vague, inspecific running of the mind, daydreams is what they're normally called. But we all know what it is. The thing never stops unless some effort is made, and the effort that is normally made seems at best spasmodic, unpredictable. It works when you can do it. It works when you remember to do it. But I am suggesting tonight that it might be of some benefit to some of you to have a new mapping, a new way for you to look at it, of what's going on. And I suggest that this has some promise, that it is a playback. But now look at it this way. It is not inspecific. It is not vague. It is a playing back of previously recorded material. That's all it has in its repertoire. That is all it has to call on. For those of you that, if you've ever thought it even condemnable that your mind is, after the general condemnation or opposition to its mechanical running, some of you may have found specific complaint on the basis of its redundancy. But what the hell do you expect? It is like calling a country and western station and asking them if they'll play some rap. Yeah. They only got a certain library of CDs. They only got one kind of music. There is no such thing as you daydreaming over anything that you have not yet recorded. Unless we have somebody listening to this who's 4 or 5 years old. And if you're listening to this, write me. I want to meet you. Even when the mind, I pointed this out, but you can look at it this way. Even when the mind is running, even when the playback mode is running, what appears to be scenes of the future about what you're going to do when you leave here tonight, or what you're going to do in the nature of getting revenge about someone who's cheated you, shortchanged you. All you can do is replay material that you have already recorded. That's why people continue, in one sense, this is not the reason, but it's in one sense why men find, some fairly observant men out at the street level, find that they continue to relive the same life over and over, or put another way, they find it hard to come up with new, as they call it, solutions to old problems. That is, if somebody cheats you, and you've been cheated before in a business deal, or you've been cheated in a love affair, whatever you look at it, everyone should know by now. You only have a very limited cache of responses available to you. Most people just one. If you are really worldly wise, hip, sophisticated, and debonair, you might have two, but you normally forget about the second one. Except when the first one fails and you think, well, next time I'll do that second one. And of course, 6 months later or 6 minutes later, you forget about it again. The thing is, the mind, ordinary people believe that the mind is free. Educated, sophisticated, ordinary people. That is one of the descriptions of man's intellect. It is infinite. It has no boundaries. It can soar. It can do anything. You cannot dream. The old example is simply you cannot, even with a wager of $1 million on it, a prize awaiting you, you cannot draw a new animal. All you can do is draw an animal made up of a whole bunch of parts of animals that you already known about. The mind, even when I say it is doing nothing on the playback mode, but playing back in your head previously recorded material. That's all it can do. But an ordinary person would say that's not true because I can imagine things. All right, I'm imagining right now, I've never been to the South Pacific, but I'm imagining right now I'm stepping off a plane in Bora Bora. Do I have to go any further? You know damn well what goes on in your mind. It is you. It is the previously recorded you. It is the history of you that is very well documented inside of you. All you can do, you can imagine as best you can. Maybe you've seen photographs, but whatever it is, you may imagine. Well, there I am stepping off this plane after flying for 20 hours in the sunshine, peoples of a type I've never seen, an environment. But you can't make it up. You have no material. You have no way to imagine, to project any future occurrence except based upon and limited to that which has already been recorded by you. In the recording process, except in specific instances having to do with what's normally called education, most people's processes are closed down. The recording is by and large closed down for all useful purposes, 10, 11, 12 years old. What most cultures start considering that a kid is becoming fairly responsible. They look at other ways, but you're, in a sense, all that you've ever recorded that's going to be of any personal use to you has been recorded, and the record is now just running out of focus. The only exceptions being, as I said, if you must concentrate on something later on in life, or if you have a specific purpose that externally to you that's causing you to concentrate, to wit, you go to school, you're trying to get your bachelor's in physics, you have to take in new facts. So you certainly have to record new information specifically, but it will always be after a fairly young age. By the time you're in your second decade, the recording, other than for specific purposes as dictated, as required by some external situation in which you are placed, such as educational demands, or having to come up, if you're stuck out on the highway and your car won't start and you get out, what little you know, you're trying to figure out how to get it started before you die of the heat and thirst, that you then have to concentrate. And you might learn something new, but it will always be through force of circumstance. It will not be because you are attempting to do it. Not as a rule. Everyone knows that by now. It's not a sermon. I don't have to prove it. You either know it or you realize it or you don't. The recording has stopped. Everything that's played in a man's head is based upon previous material. That's it. I was tempted to stop with that, but some of you should be at a certain place by now, somewhere in the general area, that alone I should have stopped, or you should have gotten left the room and used that for a while. Because that is not the way people normally consider what's going on in their mind, their thought processes, their daydreams, this other side of consciousness, this sense of yourself in your skull that you find lacking, or you wouldn't be here listening to this, attempting to do this. But rather than look at it as being something, well, it's kind of strange, and no telling what sorts of influences, circumstances have caused it to be like this. Well, it's simple to describe. I'm describing it now. You were born with these modes. You were born with a record mode in operation. To the degree to which, and I could go into this, but it's of no consequence, to the degree to which you have specifically focused it, to that same degree, whatever is being recorded, whatever you can be aware of through your senses and your own reaction to it, to the same intensity, that is the same amount of attention given, to that same degree is the ability to retrieve it. And I don't mean just willfully, to that same degree is the playback mode's ability to draw upon the material. Well, I was saying that people keep finding themselves limited to certain responses, that every time somebody cheats you or every time you get mad, you've got one response. And people, every now and then, ordinary people try to do such as this. People do it that had if their mother was frightened by a book on pop psychology maybe, they will end up some way believing, well, I should try and come up with some new responses. I'm just wearing these out and I cannot seem to fulfill my own destiny. I cannot seem to serve my own best interest by every time somebody gets mad at me, I get frightened. So what I should do, I should stand up to people. Not necessarily a fist fight, but I always give in. Always give in. And you can read in a book. There's always somebody promoting that kind of idea. Religion promotes it constantly. Are you no good? Yes, we'll be good. That'll be $10 and you're now a Catholic. So a psychology book can say, do people frighten you? Yes. Do you let it get to you? Yes. Well, don't do that. And people think, God, that's a good idea. All right. And so anyway, a person tries it and it doesn't work. They may not be attentive enough to even notice it doesn't work. That'll keep you from further guilt and humiliation in case you are in case you're full. In case you've got all the guilt and humiliation you need, then you just don't record that it doesn't work. The thing is, people can try to do something. I was about to make sort of an obscure point. That's sort of funny, isn't it? An obscure point in the middle of this. But it's more obscure than the rest of it. That a person comes up with the idea, let us say, if you follow this right quick, that for whatever reason, somebody suggests or they read in a book, they realize that all somebody has to do throughout life, from their mother to their boss to a stranger on the street corner to somebody in the store, somebody go, hey, what do you want? I'm busy. And all somebody's got to do like that, and you're like a whipped dog. That you want to leave, you can't handle it, and so you read somewhere, somebody suggests, well, what you should do is stand up for yourself. When somebody does something like that, go, hey, you don't even need to talk to me like that. You just say something. Just don't let it happen. They go, by God, I will, and they won't. They can't. They have no previous recorded material upon which to draw, except listen to this. They could have heard this same story years and years ago. They could have read this 200 or 300 times, but the point is, even though they were exposed to it, they did not record it with enough intensity to where they can now draw on it. The reason I went through that is to tell you there, under ordinary conditions, unless it has been recorded in the mind to an intense, you understand what I mean by intensity? Like the volume was up on, if we're just talking about audio, that the volume is up enough to where when you play the tape back, you can hear it. But you could also have somebody making a speech, and we could have the tape turned so low that you could play back the tape that's being recorded right now and not hear me. That's all I mean by intensity, but you got to take it in the full sensual spectrum, sight, sound. And so you could have been exposed to the idea that a person, if you let other people's aggression get the best of you, it's not to your benefit, and the way to deal with it is to return aggression for at least a stalwart backbone. To at least tell people that they can't do that, they shouldn't do that. And you go, yes, 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 and you read it. But if it is not recorded with enough intensity, it is not part of your repertoire. You cannot retrieve it. And so therefore you keep reading it, and it's like something new. This is repeated in everyone's life over and over. And I am not talking about the unconscious mind and all that shit. Stuff. Crap. There is something else about the playback. It can listen to itself. We're getting into, anyway, it can listen to itself. It does constantly. And when it listens to itself, what it amounts to is it re-records what it is listening to, and it is even more intense than it was before, which results in what the Spanish call an idée fixe. And don't you Italians write me and tell me that that is not German. It is. It becomes a constant replaying. It is like a golden oldie. It's like maybe the first 10 times you heard Stairway to Heaven, you thought, well, no big deal. But after the 1,000th time, you begin to think, that's a catchy little ditty. That is what. It is that kind of, what idée fixe is. It's a kind of fixation, and especially it adds to it if there is any sort of negative passion involved. That is, you've been cheated. Somebody's broken your heart again in a sad love affair, whatever it is. And there it is. It's playing back. Forget what caused it. The thing plays back all the time. So just skip the idea of causes. But there you are doing your morning exercises, taking a shower, and here it is, whatever the cheat was that somebody doing you, they want, well, just sign right here, and I guarantee you this will pay 25% within 6 months, or you get all your money back. And you hear him again. And then you hear what you are going to say when you see him, which the only thing you can do is imagine what you've done in the past. But there it is. It's replaying itself. It's got the negative emotion to it. You're like, son of a bitch. And, of course, you're mad at you. But anyway, it's negative passion, and you keep replaying it. You understand it was recorded at good, solid intensity. When you found out, when you went over to check on your investment, and they didn't answer the door, and they had a for rent sign on the office, and the phone's out of, has been disconnected. This whole thing, you understand how this goes. But what happens is the playback. Now think about it this way. The playback listens to itself play back. Now I'm talking about under automatic, ordinary conditions. I'm going to try to get us into, you figure where I'm going, some of you anyway. You can probably figure it out for yourself. But the playback listens to itself. If you're not making any other effort, if you're just an ordinary, civilized, sane, middle-of-the-road, bourgeoisie person, you are listening to this. The playback, I shouldn't say you are, the playback listens to itself. If it is not being interfered with in any other manner, and most of the time it doesn't amount to anything. That the playback listening to itself is no more passionate, it is no more involved, it is no more intense than that which is being played back. And but now all of you have had ample opportunity, I assume that you understand that what is being played back in your head most of the time, well into the 90%, is meaningless, it is vague, it is inspecific, it is non-stirring in you, it is non-passionate, it's just noise. Of course, the more experience you've had in this, the more just noise becomes more than just noise. But still, you understand it's just noise, that the majority of the playback going on in your head is nothing of an extreme nature, let's say. I know that in some of you people it may be not quite that cut and dried, but keep it to yourself. All right, I'll put it another way so that you don't feel left out or feel strange. Most people seem to have, I'll put it that way, most people seem to have 3 or 4 fairly passionate playback and re-playback and re-record items going on in their life. It's really according to your genetic disposition, the way you were wired up to begin with is the truth. But some people, it's not unusual that some people at any given time, let us say that you have had a breakup in a love affair in the last 6 months. Let's say it's going on every 4 or 5 years, or something like that. Then that's the kind of thing you latch on. That maybe of a sexual nature. Or maybe there's one of something stupid you did. That you wrecked your car, you got drunk, got put in jail. Anything that, but some people have 2 or 3, and they're always negative. There's no such thing, in the sense we're talking about now, as a positive idée fixe. Nobody has ever enjoyed the death. Or nobody has ever been pathologically happy. Of course, that's not true. We were talking about that earlier. You understand, people that do seem to be that way, the state, that is, ordinary people, want to put them away. What's wrong with you, sir? Don't you understand the severity of what's going on? At any rate, leaving that aside, people never go to a psychiatrist or a rabbi or a priest, but people never seek professional help saying, my mind just runs all the time. Psychiatrist, psychologist, oh, I know you're in the right place. Sit down. You got some money, sit down, lay down. They never do that. They never go to the trouble to seek help and then go, and the guy said, well, what's bothering you? What's the problem? Well, it's not that. It's just I just have all these happy pictures, but the damn things just keep going on and on, over and over, and I'll try to get upset. I'll try to think of, something horrible in the world, and I have these it just goes on and on. That's not true. The thing listens to itself. The playback mode will listen to itself. Put it simple, it's like digging a rut. It's like walking through a field over and over, cutting across the corner of someone's lot. You know damn well, and that's what it amounts to in another sense, a physiological sense, is a cutting of a continual neural path. But you keep recording these things, and the circumstance can change. You can be now worried about a broken love affair from recently, whereas 6 months ago it was from 2 years ago. You can change. In other words, the players can change. You got cheated in a card game, and last year you got cheated in an automobile deal, and the year before that you got cheated in a land scheme. And so the players, the specifics, the nouns, the pronouns can change, but the kind of particular playback that's of great intensity in your operation, many people have 2 or 3, when I said that generally it amounts to very little intense. At any rate, you've got a whole spectrum there, but as you know, most of the time, you're just wandering around, and it's just the noise going on. It's just the playback itself, and you don't really pay it in particular attention. The reporting aspect, and those other 3, but this is the specific one, is the only way that will shut off, other than the pause, but it is the active way. The only active way to shut off the playback. There is no switch. And put another way that we've been talking about, do understand that playback that is going on cannot take or will not take, under any ordinary conditions, new information. It is not a matter of a person, which this is tried constantly. It is not a matter of someone deciding, well, if the damn thing is going to keep playing back, if that mode is going to run from now on, at least I'll give it some new material. I'll break into the station some way, and I'll force them to take on some new CDs. I'll give them a new vocabulary. I'll give them some new material to play back. It cannot be done under ordinary conditions. And I'll give you this. You can do it a little, literally. But for every ounce of success you have, it takes 20 years and 1,400 tons and about all the money and sweat you have to accomplish that. Did I make that clear? The payoff for being able to try to get any new material in that playback mode, the payoff to call it unbelievably small is unbelievably charitable. For any useful purpose. You can try it yourself, but it's just a simple fact. For all intents and useful, pragmatic purposes, you cannot get into the record mode. You're wasting your time. So then the question is, or should be, how can it be stopped, or can it be stopped? It can be stopped if you are in the report mode. I started to call it the writing mode when I was thinking about this as a news team. I'm still referring to the same thing. As I said, the reporting, there is no real good English word. I don't know any word to put in here. But what it is would be like the news team. They're just all staying around outside the Capitol, outside a motel, and they're waiting for somebody, known or unknown, that is specified. Let's make it easy. They're waiting for a famous person. They're out there. The sound man, the cameraman, the reporter themselves, which in your case for this allegory is you. It's a one-man operation. Remember, the camera cannot be cut off. The camera, along with the audio, it's running. That's the record mode. You cannot turn it off. But you guys just staying out there. And they said, well, actress so-and-so or sports, Senator so-and-so should be passing out here shortly going to this car. So there you are. You can't turn off the camera, but and there's nothing particular going on, let's say. There might be, there might not be. You may have to dodge cars. Somebody may come by and ask you the time, but you may just be staying out there. As, a large part of everybody's, an ordinary man's intellectual life, you're up to this level. Mm-hmm. That's the playback. The record, remember, is always going on, but that is the playback. Then suddenly, here he comes. Here he comes. So then you and the sound man, everybody else, and you have to get your pad. You have to know what your questions are. You have to give it your attention. So here he comes, the movie star, whoever it is, you understand the allegory. You have to then willfully, and through some control, if you were a reporter, you can't just open your mouth and go, blah, 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 blah. You have to give some thought. You don't start asking a senator questions you would a movie star, like, how did you like kissing so-and-so in your last movie? Well, some senators wouldn't mind that, but some you've got to give it some attention. It is, as I pointed out earlier, it is the place. You can fake it, according to what the tastes are of any particular area, but the only place that you can actually accomplish anything resembling creative effort in the arts of all sorts, literature, just creative thinking, are to actually engage in anything resembling objective analysis of something going on, that you're trying to analyze something that happened, or the news of the world, or anything. It is only there. Playback will be glad to do it, because that's what you're doing when you're watching TV normally, even if it's the news. That's what you're doing at a movie. You can say, people nowadays consider, I hear it all the time, that movies are the art, or at least the American art of the 20th century, and they critically analyze movies and books, fiction, everything else. I'm not singling out anything, that's just the nature of the way life is, but you also should know by now that that is not in any way resembling objective analysis. It is not done. It's all part of the same game. It is playback feeding on itself. So it takes willful, held attention to turn on the report mode and keep it there. You have to hold the button down. You can't mash it down and walk off, because then it'll go back into playback immediately. You know that. You have to stand there and hold that button down. But as long as you do that, as long as you actually are doing that, it will stop the playback. It will also, it is the only way to get new information into playback, into record, is under those conditions. That is why in later instances, after someone passes the age of 10 or 12, when I told you that the record, for all intents and purposes, is stopped, that's why a few things in a person's life after that are so memorable, in the true sense of memorable. That is, a near-death experience, or when you're a close relative, mother or father dies in the time that you were just picked up the phone, didn't expect anything, and suddenly somebody says, I've got some terrible news, your father was killed in a plane crash. And that a person never forgets. Or another way, not to be so mechanically negative sounding, the so-called mystical experiences, the times when people suddenly have extraordinary awareness and insight. It is not only the extraordinary insight. I know why they describe it that way. Many of you do too from the experience itself. But it is not just, it would not just be limited to the intrinsic experience itself. It is extraordinary and stands out in memory for the reason I'm telling you now, that it is so extraordinary at a mundane level for anything new to get into the record. Whew. That was simple when I started the sentence. Hey, it was simple when we started when you were 2 or 3 years old. Don't blame me. All right, blame me. The pause is, as I said, it's akin to the record. But it would be, it's sort of like, well, you know what it is on equipment, I assume most of you do. It would be like in a transmission, putting a gear in a transmission into neutral. The pause button you also have to hold. But the pause button does not require, or is not tied to the desire, the intent to analyze or to be creative. And people, as I said, it is an ordinary mind would have a hard time even coming up with what I mean. It is also at the heart of all the well-known so-called mystical disciplines, the attempt to remember the name of God, the attempt to be objectively neutral, the attempt to be aware of one's breath. All of these, some of them more verbally direct than others, but it is an attempt to put the mind into neutral. That is, you're not attempting to specifically do anything. It's not like trying to study in the Zen sense a koan, or that you're trying to analyze some mystical writing or something that someone told you, rather than it being something active that you're having to hold down the reporting button. That is, you have to hold it, but you are engaged in some attempted act. You are behaving actively when you do that, when you hold it down, and the only time that you hold it down is when some action is required. The pause button, back to the mystical parallel, would be like passive meditation, the attempt to simply sit and still the mind. But all of them that I mentioned, you'd be hard-pressed, there are very few exceptions, but all of the classically known, discussed, so-called mystical disciplines and approaches are variations of trying to put the mind, at least in the mental sense, we're talking about just right now the approaches from a mental standpoint, it is an attempt to put the mind in pause mode. Because it will shut down, it will shut off the playback. But there is a distinction, because then you're left, you're holding down the button, but what you're seeking, whether you looked at it that way or not, what you are seeking is inaction. As long as you can hold it, the playback is shut down. But there is a distinction in practice. There is a distinction in practice, whether you intend it or not, if you're mashing down the report button, and that's when you are attempting, let us say in a truly willful, specific manner, I just make it simple, you're trying to, as I used to call it, consider something. You know, that is to try and think about something without thinking about it. You are trying to figure something out on a higher level. How about that? But it is not playback running, because when you do this, you have shut off playback, but you are in the alternative. Now that you are holding down report, and that automatically shuts off. Without fail, it shuts off playback. So as long as you stand there and hold it, but you did it for a reason. Well, whatever it was, it didn't have to be specifically that you were reading a book or trying to figure out. It could be that suddenly something happened in life. Just somebody said something to you, and it triggered, you were about to respond a certain way, or your playback was going a certain way, and it was one of these instances where you thought, wait, there's something I'm missing. That suddenly there in the middle of just everyday affairs, you are now trying to pursue the grail. You're trying to pursue some extraordinary, some additional understanding. And so right there, without even knowing it, what you do is you push in, and as long as you're doing it, you're having to hold it. It willfully requires that you hold it, that you're trying to get something new out of what just happened, which could have been as routine as possible, but suddenly it just struck you. And so right in the middle of it, you shut off playback by mashing that down, but you are actively trying to consider something for a reason. But you're actively trying to think about something, figure out something, think about something. You're actively doing it. The pause button is when there is no activity that you're seeking. You're not trying to figure something out. You're not trying to consider or to look at something that happened. What you're trying to do, whether you understood it or whether that was your intention, what you're attempting to do or what you're seeking is inactivity of the mind. Yeah. Tapes out, that was only part of what I was going to say, but that was the heart of it. And I repeat one more time, as you should know by now, I would suggest that some of you could find it of use, and it's not just a perhaps entertaining diagram, because, well, just hell, because